My god, there's so much crap in here, which could only mean one thing. It's the end of the month again. Hi, I'm D from D&D Ditches, and today the D stands for deck of cards. Which ones? Well, you're just gonna have to watch to find out. Let's get started. Okay, so first up we have a big package. This one is once again from Noble Knight Games. In last month's unboxing video, I received a package from them and I decided that I would shop from them again. And that's exactly what I've done. There's literally a lot to unpack here, so let's go down these products and look at them one by one. From memory, I think I ordered maybe 8 items or something. So the first book is the Ravenloft adventure, The Created. Most D&D players these days will be familiar with at least Curse of Strahd, and Ravenloft is the Gothic horror setting which Curse of Strahd takes place in. We have a fold-out cover with some art and map on the inside. This is fairly common to do back in 2e. This adventure module is suitable for players from levels 2 to 4. I know a little bit about this adventure. The premise for this adventure is that the player characters' minds, or maybe their souls, become trapped in dolls. So a lot of the stories in Ravenloft tend to be based off of horror tropes and classic horror movies. So I am reminded of the movie of Child's Play with Chucky, and also maybe an evil perverted Pinocchio as inspiration for this adventure. I mean, the NPC even looks like Geppetto. And I also heard that this is a good adventure to introduce brand new players to Ravenloft. There are also some new monsters being introduced at the end of the book. Next up, we have TSR Jam 1999. This was released with association with RPGA Network. From what I understand of the RPGA Network, they used to run the conventions back in the 90s. And this book is a collection of several of the adventures that were run at these conventions across multiple campaign settings. We've got Kylie the Tout from Planescape, that's obviously Morden Kanan, Alminster, Strahd, and I believe that's Raceland. Not really that familiar with Dragonlance, and I have no idea who that is. So the back cover essentially summarizes what I just said. The contents show that this book contains 7 adventures. The one that I'm familiar with is, of course, the Planescape one called The Maxim Foe. Now, back in the day, TSR used to write a lot of adventure modules purely for the conventions, and a lot of them were never published. And a lot of these adventures were run as tournaments. For example, The Tomb of Horrors by Gary Gygax. It was written to be a meat grinder module to be used in a tournament. This book is one of the rare cases where these modules written for conventions are collated and published. Let's have a look at The Maxim Foe, which is the Planescape adventure. Now, I know a little bit about this one. It was written by Chris Perkins. At the time, I heard that because TSR was so broke, Chris actually wrote a lot of these modules for free. This adventure takes place in Biotopia, which is one of the Outer Planes. If you're interested in finding out more about the Outer Planes, I have done a video on it, so I will link the video for you. Feel free to take a look. From what I know about this adventure, it takes heavy inspiration from Jabberwocky, the poem from Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. You can see this piece of artwork, and the caption says, "Beware the Jabberwock, my son." I don't know much about the other adventures because I'm more of a Planescape guy, but I do want to run the Maxim Foe at some point. And next up we have the Spelljammer adventure Wildspace. So this adventure is designed for 4 to 6 players between levels 6 and 8. Once again, the cover comes off. There's some information on the inside cover about the murals and also abbreviated monster stats. We also have a poster map. And this shows the Hive. Now, I don't know anything about this adventure, but I am wondering if the Hive refers to the Hive of the Beholders, because on the cover of the adventure also shows a picture of a Beholder. And Beholders are part of Spelljammer. So on the back of the poster are the ships. See, there's the Beholder right there. This book is 64 pages with 6 chapters in the adventure. So this suggests to me that this adventure is fairly lengthy in size, as it was common for a lot of the published adventures to be about 32 pages. There are some new monsters introduced at the end, including the Beholder Mage, the Sentinel, and Silver Slime. Next up, we have the Ravenloft supplement called Van Richten's Guide to the Ancient Dead. Anybody who played Curse of Strahd should be familiar with the name Rudolf van Richten. I believe by day he runs an apothecary, and he also doubles as a vampire slayer, but he's also done a lot of research into other monsters as well. These Van Richten guides are actually in-universe books that he has written, and that's how he earns a living, by selling these monster books. So in the context of this book, Ancient Dead refers to mummies. Of the domains of Dread and Ravenloft, 2 of the domains are Egyptian-inspired. I've previously read through a couple of these, including the vampires and werewolves one, and in my opinion, they are amongst the best Ravenloft products during 2E. So most of the text is written in character as if Dr. Van Richten's writing it himself, and it talks about their ecology, how they're created, what their monstrous powers are, and most importantly, their weaknesses. And what these books are really good with is giving you inspiration on giving these monsters varying powers or weaknesses or stories that makes them different and stand out from their kin. For example, I remember from the Vampires book that in 2nd edition D&D vampires, their special powers are level drain. But the book gave you ideas for alternative powers. For example, for vampires, they talked about the ability to suck blood. And even if you're not intending to run a Ravenloft game, these books are really fun to read because it can be consumed like creative fiction. And all of the game mechanics are presented in the grey boxes, because everything in white is written in the form of flavor text. Next one, we have the Ravenloft adventure Adam's Wrath. This adventure is designed for a party of 4 to 8 characters of 5th to 7th level. Once again, we have a pull-out cover and a poster map. So this adventure takes place in the domain of Lamordia, and I talked previously about how the characters are based off of horror tropes and horror movies. So in this case, Adam, the dude that's on the front cover, is based off of Frankenstein's monster. And Adam has a relationship with his creator, Dr. Victor Mordenheim, who was essentially Ravenloft's version of Frankenstein. I don't know too much about this adventure, apart from the backstory of Adam and Mordenheim, but I believe with this adventure, the players will be able to explore and find out their history and their story. Next up, we have the Ravenloft adventure called Ship of Horror. This is for 4 to 6 players between levels 8 and 10. So this book is in rougher shape compared to the others. Once again, the slip-out cover with map of the ship on the interior and the island of Todstein. And then we have a one-sided map for the village of Graben and Graben Island. This is another 64-page book, and it seems to be a nautical adventure. This is also part of the Grand Conjunction adventures, and if you don't know what the Grand Conjunction is, it was an important event in the Ravenloft history. The premise being there was a prophecy called Hiskosa's Hexad. Essentially, it was a poem with 6 parts, and each of the parts was a published adventure. And supposedly something amazing happens when all of the parts are completed. So because of that, this adventure is a lot more popular than some of the others. There is a domain in Ravenloft called the Sea of Sorrows, and I think this is where this adventure takes place. Next up, we have Van Richten's Guide to the Created. I believe they released 8 of these Van Richten's guides as standalone books, and then it was later re-released as a 3-part compendium with a 9th guide added. So in this book, the Created refers to golems, in particular flesh golems. And we just looked at the Created starring Adam, and you can see in the artwork where the flesh golem gets animated. And it talks about the ecology of nutritional requirements. And remember, all the white text are the in-universe text that Dr. Van Richten has written, and the grey text refers to the game mechanics. So if you want to consume these books as works of fiction and creative writing, just read the white text and ignore the grey text. We also have some journal entries from NPCs, and it makes these books a lot of fun to read. Personally, these books are very high up in what I like to read for fun, but I'm kind of still stuck in Planescape at the moment. Here's another section which makes these books really interesting, because not only does it talk about their biology and their ecology, but also the psychology. It's about getting in the mindset of these monsters to get an understanding of how they think. For example, for the golems, stage 1, dependence, where the creation is dependent on its creator. Stage 2, confusion, where it starts developing independent thought. Stage 3, betrayal. Stage 4, contempt, and Stage 5, hatred. And it's a very interesting take on why the creator turns on its creator. And these books are fantastic at giving you inspiration on how to create memorable and unique characters and villains to use in your own game. Towards the end of the book, it gives you some suggestions on what type of adventures and what type of stories you can tell with golems. For example, obsession, terror, intimacy, tragedy. And the next one we have Van Richten's Guide to the Lich. Liches and the idea of an undead spellcaster does not have a root in classical fiction. As far as I know, it's a monster that was created specifically for Dungeons & Dragons. However, in saying that, there is a very prolific Lich in Ravenloft. His name is Azalin Rex. He is Strahd's arch-nemesis, and he is the mover and shaker of pretty much everything that happens in Ravenloft. So in the table of contents right off the bat, the book covers not only Priestly Lich, but also the Mentalist Lich. This is like a Psionic Lich, as well as the Demi-Lich. This book gives some write-up on how liches are created. Anybody who knows a little bit about the liches knows that you cannot destroy a lich just by destroying its physical form, because its life force or its unlife force are sealed inside its phylactery, so you need to also destroy its phylactery in order to destroy a lich. This book also seems to be really good if you want to run a game where one of your characters is seeking lichdom, or even one of your players is seeking lichdom. In some editions of D&D, there are books which details the exact steps that one needs to do to become a lich, but I think it's so much cooler if you were to design and create customized rituals and unique requirements for specific individuals, because it'll definitely make it a lot more memorable. Next book is Windriders of the Jagged Cliffs for the revised Dark Sun setting. You can see the logos for these two Dark Sun products look completely different. This is the original Dark Sun logo, and this is the logo for the revised Dark Sun setting. There is also a map that's included with this book. This map is a good reference to talk about the revised Dark Sun setting. So the original Dark Sun setting covered the region around the Tablelands, which is really just this part of the map. During the time of the initial Dark Sun print run, there was a series of novels called the Prism Pentad, 5 books which moved the meta story of the setting forward, as several of the setting's villains were defeated. So with the revised setting, that they decided to expand this world, and all of this refers to the expanded Athas, which is the name of the Dark Sun world. So the revised setting was not popular because Dark Sun was supposed to be an apocalyptic world, because every time one uses arcane magic in Athas, it defiles and destroys a piece of the land. However, you see that half of this map is green, because they're saying, hey, outside of the Tablelands, there's this large piece of the world that's still lush and green, which a lot of fans did not like. Book is 126 pages. Seems like this book details the Jagged Cliffs region as an expansion to Athas, and it gives some new player options. We've got feral halflings. So from what I understand of the Dark Sun lore, halflings are the progenitor race. They existed before all the other races, before even humans. This book goes into more about that. Life on the cliffs, occupations, a day in the life of the people in this region. So it talks about their culture, places, NPCs, towns, villages, the Shapers of Life. Life shaping is the art which allows them to create everything from simple tools to large buildings out of living tissues. I just realized this book is written by Monty Cook. This was released in 1995. He wrote a large number of the later Planescape books, so it seems like before he joined Planescape, he was working on Dark Sun. And then the last book of this box is the Dark Sun accessory for City-State of Tyr. We also have a poster map. And this shows a place called the Golden Tower. From what I know of the Dark Sun lore is that Tyr is one of the city-states, and it seems like the setting implies that you should use this as your starting city. Tyr was featured in the first Dark Sun adventure called Freedom, which also corresponds to the first book in the Prism Pentad series, where the Sorcerer King of Tyr was defeated and the city was freed. This book covers the state of the city now that it has been freed. First thing that I noticed from this artwork is that I know exactly who this artist is. This is done by Tony DiTerlizzi. He was the artist for the Planescape product, but this book was released prior to the launch of Planescape. And I've seen interviews with Tony where he talked about TSR wanting him to work on Planescape, but the project keeps getting delayed. So in the meantime, he did a little bit of work for Dark Sun. I know there's another book called The Elves for Athas, which I don't own, that he also worked on. So the Dark Sun setting uses a lot of these ziggurats. Kind of like this. Karlach was the Sorcerer King who was the former ruler of Tyr. And then we also have some artwork by Baxa, who is the regular interior illustrator for Dark Sun. And that is the first box. There are 10 books in this box, and it's been so long that I don't even remember what I ordered. And this is a brand new sealed copy of Al-Qadim's City of Delights box set. Golden Hazard's The City of Delights is the heart of the Enlightened Lands. It is the religious and political center of Zakhara and its inhabitants, and the most beautiful city in the entire world. But beneath the beauty lies the mystery, for the court of the Grand Caliph is as full of intrigue as the Grand Bazaar is full of adventures waiting to happen. Come explore the delights and dangers of Hazard's the golden heart of the Al-Qadim campaign world. So this includes 2 guidebooks totaling 192 pages, 8 full-color reference cards, 8 Monstrous compendium sheets, 1 clear map overlay for measuring distance, and 2 full-color poster map sheets. So apart from the Al-Qadim campaign setting box set, this is the only other box set supplement which was released for the Al-Qadim setting, not including any of the adventures. Since this box set is new and sealed, I won't break the seal for this video, but I can do a separate unboxing video in the future, so if you want to see that, let me know down in the comments. And we have another box set. This is Spelljammer War Captain's Companion. This is also the only Spelljammer box set that I am missing. Anybody who is not familiar with Spelljammer, this is the space opera setting of D&D. These days when we think about space, we think science fiction like Star Wars or Star Trek. But Spelljammer's taken a fantasy interpretation of space travel. This is more akin to what people from the medieval or Renaissance period thought space travel was like. Looks like this box set's got more to do with the game mechanics of the Spelljammer setting rather than the lore and world building. Let's open it and have a look. Okay, let's have a look at the content. We have 3 booklets. There should be 3 posters and a bunch of cards and other miscellaneous stuff. So it seems like the theme of this box set is space combat. And this is a one-sided poster, comparative sizes of spacefaring vessels. So I recall the base Spelljammer box set had something like this, so I believe these are just the ships that's introduced in this box set. I don't see the classic Nautiloid. Anybody who played Baldur's Gate 3 should know what a Nautiloid Spelljammer ship looks like. It's basically the ship right at the beginning of the game. And then we have 2 of these posters. That's basically just a blank hex grid, obviously used to facilitate space combat. And we have the cards here. I've only ever seen the contents of this box set through pictures online and also on eBay, so I didn't actually realize all of the cards are attached. I will open it up and show you guys. Yeah, it's difficult to fit all of this on camera, but this gives you the idea. There are 3 pieces of these ship cards like the Clipper and the Trio. These cards are actually model cutouts. You can punch these out and actually make ship models using these cards. And this is the other half. So it seems like the main shtick with this box set is the cardboard cutouts of the models of the ships. It's intended for you to build these ship models that you can use like miniatures on the hex map. And then we also have markers. Clearly these are used to track damage and hit points and other things to do with the combat. Now there's just one thing that I've noticed, and that is I seem to be missing one of these cards. It should be here. You can see the edge of this cardboard has some teeth marks. It looks like a piece of the card has been punched out and removed. There should be 12 pieces in total, but there is only 11 in this set. So it seems like this is incomplete. However, looking it up online, it seems like the piece that's missing is another piece of the player aid card, and it looks like it could actually be identical. I think it makes sense to have 2 player aid cards so that you can distribute them to the different players, or one for the DM and one for the players. So if that's the case, I'm glad that any of the cards that are missing is the duplicated one, because I'm not missing anything that's unique. So I'm a little bit disappointed that this is not complete, but all things considered, it's not a huge loss. Now let's have a look at the books. So the first one is War Captain's Guide. So the first few pages just gives you a recap of what was explained in the base box when it comes to Wildspace, air envelopes, and gravity. Then it goes into proficiencies, which is like the 2e version of skills, some new gear. And now we're on to what looks like new ships. So this chapter talks about shipbuilding companies. Looks like we're introduced to certain factions or organizations in the various prime material worlds that build Spelljammer ships. We've got a place in Greyspace, which is in Greyhawk, Krynnspace, which is in Krynn, the Dragonlance world, and then we have Waterdeep of Realmspace. We all know that that is the Forgotten Realms. Evermeet from Realmspace, that's where the elves live in Faerun. And then it talks about ship construction and ship improvements, that's weapons, armor, and cargo. And then new magical items. Book 2 is called Ship Recognition Manual. And it looks like this entire book is dedicated to showcasing all the different types of ships in the Spelljammer universe. This ship is called a Draka, which is built by Viking groundling humans. Imagine a Viking ship in space. And then we have the Dragon ship, which looks like a Chinese-inspired ship. The Neogi Mine Spider, which was introduced in the original box set. And there's the Nautiloid, a classic. I love that this ship looks like a blowfish, but it's called a porcupine ship, and it's built by goblins. The Orcs build the Scorpion, and the Lizardmen built this cute turtle ship. And then finally, we have Book 3, Combat Among the Stars. Looks like this book is all about combat mechanics. It shows you movement through the grid, ramming, missile fire, boarding, ship and crew damage, magic and spell use, and optional rules. Rules for 3D play. So there was a lot of complaint about the 5e Spelljammer book, which did not include any of the ship-to-ship combat. So if you're one of these people who wants to run Spelljammer 5e and want some rules on ship-to-ship combat, well, this is the book for you. I believe you can purchase this book on DM's Guild. So get yourself a copy of the PDF and you'll be able to run these rules in no time. And keeping with the Spelljammer theme, the next book is Krynnspace. We have a poster of Krynnspace. If you watched last month's unboxing video, I've talked about the concept of crystal spheres in Spelljammer. This was a thing in 2e, which 5e has since dropped. The idea is that each of the prime material world is encased in its own crystal sphere, and each of these crystal spheres contains a solar system. Krynnspace specifically references the crystal sphere that the planet Kryn belongs to, and Kryn is the world of Dragonlance. You can see that that is Kryn. But apart from Kryn, this crystal sphere also contains other planets, and it is via spelljamming that you can actually go and visit all of these other planets, as well as the satellites and other places. So the three most popular prime material worlds each have named crystal spheres. So we have Krynnspace, we have Realm Space for Forgotten Realms, and then we have Grey Space for Greyhawk. And each of these crystal spheres has received its own published supplement, but Krynnspace is the first one that I own. I don't actually own that many Spelljammer products, and this is the first time that I bought so many Spelljammer products in one go. So this is a 96-page book. This book details all of the heavenly bodies of Krynnspace, starting with the sun. Riox is the second planet, talks about the climate, the land features, lifestyle. Given Spelljammer is a fantasy space setting, all of these planets have something on it, and you can get there via spelljamming. This is the Dragonlance world of Kryn, and it talks about Kryn in the perspective of spelljamming. Because if you're seeking regular adventures, you can look at the other Dragonlance products for that. And then goes on to other heavenly bodies like asteroids, islands, black clouds, spacefaring companies, the gods of Krynnspace, the Tinker Gnomes, and some adventure ideas towards the end. And because I've teased you guys for long enough, let's have a look at the deck of cards. And we have the second edition deck of Psionic powers. The box itself looks like it's seen better days though. I can't tell if the colors faded or this was just the way that they made them. If you watched the previous episode, I mentioned that Psionics are my favorite D&D class. It's been a long time since I've read the 2e complete books of Psionics, so I'm a little bit rusty with the rules. Essentially, Psionics are psychic powers, and back in 2e, Psionics were divided into 6 different disciplines. You can think of them like spell schools. So these cards are separated by disciplines. So the first set is clairsentience. So these kind of powers are like clairvoyance. It's a little bit similar to divination spells. And then we have psychokinesis, which is the manipulation of energy. This will be similar to evocation. It's interesting that the first card is called Create Object because this power is more similar to conjuration spells. In 3e, they actually created a new discipline called Meta-Creativity, which Create Object would fall into. But in 2e, Meta-Creativity was not yet a discipline. We've got Megakinesis, which is a damage-dealing power. Ballistic Attack, Control Wind, Inertial Barrier. So a lot of the psychokinesis discipline involves doing damage. And then we have psychometabolism. This discipline is the most similar to transmutation spells because it involves transforming part of one's body to do certain things. So a lot of these are defensive in nature. See, flesh armor. And then we have psychoportation. This is similar to conjuration, except it's more about the travel aspect. Astral projection, banishment, phase, spatial distortion, teleport object, and the like. And then we have telepathy. Telepathy is similar to enchantment, but there are also aspects of divination as well, such as reading one's mind. So we've got superior invisibility. So invisibility is telepathy because you're not exactly making yourself invisible, but you're making someone else not being able to perceive you. Ego Whip is an attack mode. This is the idea of psionic combat. Psionic combat is very convoluted. There's a card in here which talks about psionic attack and defense modes. So the idea is that the attacker will use one of the attack modes and the defender will use one of the defend modes, and there would be modifiers. And from what I remember, in order to initiate psionic attack, one first needs to make contact, and that is they need to succeed on a roll, and then they need to be able to succeed on 3 attacks. And then once that's succeeded, the victim is... I don't remember exactly what happens, but they're pretty much completely incapacitated. So because of that, some people think that psionics are too strong in 2e, especially against non-psionic monsters, which is pretty much most of them, because they're not capable of defending. And the last discipline is meta-psionics, which is similar to the idea of meta-magic, because you're spending your resources to empower or alter another power. In 3e, the 6th discipline was changed to meta-creativity, and meta-psionics were changed into feats like meta-magic. And the last set are psionic combat battle cards. And on the back, so it talks about attack modes and defense modes, but I don't recognize the names on top, like the truth, the shield, the wall. Maybe it's related to monsters? It seems to reference these names as attack modes and defense modes, but yeah, not sure. If you played a psionic in 2e, comment down below and let me know how you liked it. That was a heavy package with 4 4th edition books. Let's have a look at these in order. First up, we have Players Handbook 2. I already own the slipcase with the Players Handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, and the Monster Manual. One thing that they did for 4e, which was controversial, was that the Players Handbook did not contain all of the core classes. In 4th edition, each class has a different power source, so we have Martial, Arcane, and Divine that were contained in Players Handbook 1. So in Players Handbook 2, they introduced the Primal classes, and they consisted of the Barbarian and the Druid. We also have the Bard and the Sorcerer, which is being introduced in Players Handbook 2, which were part of the core classes from previous edition. Because of that, 4e was criticized for locking certain fan-favorite core classes behind essentially a DLC where you had to pay for another product to get it back, which was one of the complaints with 4e. We also have the Gnome and Half-Orc, which were core races from 3e that were not included in the original Player's Handbook, and this is now being reintroduced into the game. 4e also introduced some new character classes that has not made a comeback since. We've got the Avenger, the Invoker, Warden, for example. So let's have a look at the Avenger. So every class in 4e had a role. This is similar to the different roles in a MMO, such as the tank, DPS, healer, that type of stuff. So you've got Striker. There's also Controller, Defender, and something else. I'm not that familiar with 4e. We've got the power source, which is Divine. Armor proficiency is Cloth. This is like a cleric but not able to wear armor. And in 4e, all classes had powers. They were divided into daily powers, per encounter powers, and at-will powers. One of the criticisms of 4e was that it tried to emulate an MMO like World of Warcraft, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. It did feel a bit like an MMO, except that you had to keep track of everything manually yourself. We've got the Barbarian. And then something else that was also very 4e were the Paragon Paths. When a character reached level 10 or 11 or something like that, they're able to pick different Paragon Paths. This is a little bit like picking your subclass, except it's more of like a specialization. I didn't play 4e enough to get into that level of play, so I can't really tell you too much about it. So I am a collector of mostly 2nd edition material. However, I have played and enjoyed all subsequent editions. I do have a small collection of 4th edition books, and as you see, I'm adding to it. It is fairly low on my priority list. However, occasionally I see 4E books being listed for prices that's below the market average, and I think that there's going to be a time where I complete my second edition collection and I'll get into subsequent editions, so might as well pick them up when they're cheap. And I'm not opposed to playing 4th edition, but this is probably not going to be the edition that I would run as a DM. Mostly because I feel like 4E is quite limited when it comes to anything that's outside of combat, as it is very heavily combat based. And I enjoy games that are heavy on roleplays, and I feel like that's something that 4E doesn't really do well. And I would not be running 4E to its strength if I do not prioritize combat. The next book is a Players Handbook 3, and this features Psionic, Divine, and Primal heroes. This is really the only book out of this lot that I really wanted, because as it's another excuse for me to gush about psionics again. And on the cover, it looks like we have a Githyanki or a Githzerai. So it's Githzerai being introduced as a playable race, even though she is the splitting image of Lae'zel from Baldur's Gate 3. Githyanki and Githzerai are sibling races. There was a divide in their people once upon a time, and the Githyanki stayed on the astral plane and the Githzerai moved to Limbo. They really did not want to make the Githyanki playable due to the fact that they were always treated as villains. So new classes, we have the Ardent, Battlemind, Monk, Scion, Rune Priest, and Seeker. So I have not had the opportunity to play a psionic character in 4E before, because every single time I ask the DM whether I can play a psionic character, the answer's always been no. But I've been told that psionics were implemented really well into 4E, due to the fact that every single class has powers at every level, whereas in previous editions, psionics had their own rules. So both the player and the DM would have to read an entire new book just to use all the unique rules for this one character. So I understood why the DM didn't allow me to play a psionic character, but it was still annoying. Interesting to note in 4E is that the monk is psionically powered, which actually makes quite a bit of sense if you think about it, given a lot of their training consists of strengthening the mind. And we have the Scion. This will probably be the class that I would like to play in 4E. They're a bit like a psionically powered wizard, having access to similar kind of powers as a wizard, except it's fueled by their mind. I previously talked about how I love the consistent and clean presentation of the 4E books. You can see that the design between the two books are quite cohesive, and also the information is quite easy to use. So towards the end of the book, you have some magical items. I also recognize this piece of artwork. It came from the 3.5e Expanded Psionics Handbook. And I believe this piece of artwork's also from the same book. The character that's using a scythe, wielding mental power, I believe that that's the Shaper class. Next up, we have the Dungeon Master's Guide for 4E. So it seems like this book contains more of this miscellaneous DM's only information, but the main reason why I wanted this book is because of this. Sigil, the City of Doors, from the Planescape setting, got its own write-up in this book, so I wanted to get this book and see it for myself. If you watch any of the other videos on my channel, you know that I am quite a big Planescape freak, so books containing planar material is quite high up on my collection list. And outside of the 2nd edition Dungeon Master Guide, I don't think I've ever read any other Dungeon Master Guides. Even though I'm a forever DM, I just feel like a lot of this information isn't really necessary. I tend to have a pretty good gut feel when it comes to designing adventures or making rulings on the spot. So Paragon campaigns, this is talking about high-level adventures, how to design them, and how to run them. I've personally not run any high-level games, so that might still be some good information in there. Now we come to the section with Sigil. This piece of artwork depicts a city which is contained on the inside of a torus, a ring-shaped thing. However, I feel like this piece of artwork depicts the city as being very claustrophobic. I know a little bit about what this section covers. I will give this book credit for continuing the post-faction war timeline. If you didn't know, the final adventure released for Planescape in 2E was called Faction War, where all of the factions in Sigil went out in a metaphorical blaze of glory, and the lady issued a decree forcing all the factions to leave Sigil. And as Planescape was not officially supported in 3rd and 4th edition, apart from the occasional article published in Dragon magazine, they didn't know how to advance the story forward. However, in the 5e release of Planescape, they kind of rolled the timeline back to before the faction war. They did and they didn't, because they took bits and pieces of either continuity. For example, the faction's Believers of the Source and Sign of One were folded into Mind's Eye, which was what happened post-faction war, but 5e acts like the faction war has never happened. So there you go. And the last book that we have is The Plane Below: Secrets of the Elemental Chaos. Like I just said, because I'm a Planescape nut, I tend to buy all the planar related books. 2nd and 5th edition both uses the Great Wheel cosmology, and this is the reason why you can use 2e Planescape products, and it translates pretty well as 5e uses the same planar cosmology. You can see that Chaos Attacks gets a mention. On the planes, Chaos is spelled with an X. The Chaos Attacks, also known as the Chaos Men, were one of the 15 factions of Sigil that were expelled from the city post-faction war, so they should be active on the plane of Limbo. Now in 3rd edition they switched over to using the World Tree cosmology, and then in 4th edition they switched over to using the World Axis cosmology. Now to give a very quick simple explanation, all of the planes were folded into the plane above, which is the Astral Sea, and the plane below, which is the Elemental Chaos. So all the different hells, the elemental planes, Limbo, and other bits and pieces are now part of the Elemental Chaos, and some of the other planes and random places are also folded into the Astral Sea. And then they also created the Shadowfell and the Feywild. And then they rewrote a bunch of the lore and included a bunch of nonsense like the Primordials. So overall it doesn't really make a lot of sense, and I would never use the 4e cosmology. But I think what these books are good for is that sometimes you get a write-up of a city or a town or a single site or a dungeon or a place that's interesting, and I can lift it from this book wholesale and slot it into my Planescape game using the Great Wheel cosmology. And that's really what being a DM is all about. You see something that you like, just steal it and put it in your own thing. In here we have 2 comics. This is Forgotten Realms The Grand Tour and Birthright The Serpent's Eye. Now a little bit of a history lesson. These were released in 1994. Apparently they were free promotional products that were free with a purchase if you bought one of these TSR items. And there were 4 that were released. So apart from these 2, we also had Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Labyrinth of Madness and Dragonlance The Fifth Age as the other 2 published comics. Now there was a 5th comic book that was created for Planescape. It was called Unity of the Rings, which was not published officially. However, years later, it released a digital release online, and it's absolutely fantastic. It gives you a great introduction to the Planescape setting. We just talked about the Great Wheel cosmology. It's a fantastic short story about a romp through the planes of the Great Wheel. I absolutely recommend that after watching this video that you go to Google and search for Planescape Unity of the Rings comic. It will take you 5 minutes, but it's a great story. I have personally not read through either of these before, but if the Planescape one is of any indication, it's likely that this is going to give you a short story that is an introduction to that setting. So I have not read through the Birthright books that I own, but the first impression is that this comic is very wordy. The Planescape one is not like this. It's mostly storytelling through pictures. This is the Forgotten Realms tour, so we obviously have Elminster, Kelpin Blackstaff, and I'm wondering if that is Volo because of all the scrolls, but I kind of feel like that's too serious to be Volo. And see, that's Volo right there. And if you play Baldur's Gate 3, you have an idea what Volo's like. So he always comes across like a used car salesman. Next up, we have 2 more Ravenloft products. So this is the Ravenloft Monstrous Compendium Appendices 1 and 2. If you watched my previous episode, I received Monstrous Compendium Appendix 3 last month, and I talked about how Appendices 1 and 2 were originally released in a loose leaf format, and then it was re-released in a book format, and this is what I'm talking about. You find that there is a continuity to these videos, so that's an incentive for you to subscribe, where I'll probably reference this video in my next video. So Appendices 1 and 2 are separated. So we have the iconic Grim Reaper as a monster. Interesting that it only has 5 hit dice. Hit dice is like the monster level. Imagine the Grim Reaper being only level 5. And the write-up says that it's a creature from the negative material plane. And at this point, they haven't gotten very consistent with the naming of the planes. The negative energy plane is part of the inner planes, and I recently did a video covering the inner planes. So if you want to find out more about it, I will link a video for you. And interestingly enough, this book contains humanoid vampire variants: dwarf, elf, gnome, halfling, kender. If you don't know what a kender is, they are from the Dragonlance setting. They're loosely based on the halfling race. You can see that they're from Sithicus, which is the Dragonlance domain. And its Dark Lord is Lord Soth, a very famous figure in Dragonlance. And then we move over to Appendix 2. Appendix 2 changes the format a little bit, whereas Appendix 1 is about introducing new monster variants, whereas Appendix 2 is about giving you unique NPCs to use. Seems like a lot of these are still inspired by horror tropes. Just when you thought that illithids or vampires couldn't be more scary, we have the illithid vampire. And then we have Ravenloft The Gothic Earth Gazetteer. While this has the Ravenloft logo, this is actually part of the setting called Masque of the Red Death. So Masque of the Red Death is like a sub-setting part of the Ravenloft product line. Instead of the game taking place in Gothic horror domain of dread, where the time period is between, medieval, Renaissance, and even a later period, depending on the horror trope, Masque of the Red Death takes place in 1890s Earth, which is why it's called Gothic Earth. We have a slip-out cover. We have calendars for 1890 to 1899 across a 10-year period. The artwork is done in very 1890s style. You see that this is very Victorian England. And the content for this book provides you a list of events with regards to technological or cultural revolutions and the heirs to the organizations that were around. So this setting, I haven't read too much into it. Seems like a fantasy version of world history. So this book seems like it's a mix of actual historical events as well as fantasy fictional events. For example, 1897, we've got H.G. Wells publishes The Invisible Man. And then it goes into the key events of the 1890s. Railroads became a thing during that time. We've got the Trans-Siberian Railroad, the Orient Express. If you're inspired by the Agatha Christie books, then this setting might just be the one for you. I played a lot of Japanese video games when I was younger, and one of my favorite series is called Shadow Hearts. And the games told a series of stories between 1890s and 1920s. And it was set in the real world, and there were fantasy elements with it. So in the games, you were able to meet famous people from history, such as Rasputin or Princess Anastasia. And this setting is kind of the same idea. You can see that this book gives you a list of famous people which were alive on Earth at the time. For example, you've got Aleister Crowley and Marie Curie. So reading this, it really makes me want to run a Masque of the Red Death game because it just feels really awesome to be playing in that timeline in actual history of our world and being able to meet some of these historical characters. I think another apt comparison would be the Assassin's Creed series, where you're playing a certain moment in time and you're able to meet and interact with famous people of that time period. And this is Thri-kreen of Athas, another Dark Sun supplement. So this comes with a poster on the Thri-kreen. So the artwork shows the different subspecies of the Thri-kreen. We also have some close-up artwork on their expressions. So when the antenna is apart, it says yes. When it's crossed, it means no. And when it's leaning forward, that is a smile. A close-up of the Thri-kreen hands of the different species. And then we have a cross-section of the internal organs. And then down the bottom, we have the various life stages from a larva, child, to adult. I want to say, though, this artwork makes the Thri-kreen look really cute. There is a certain childlike innocence about them that makes them look adoring. I know for a fact that Thri-kreens are actually supposed to be fearsome warriors. But I do appreciate this artistic interpretation of the creature. This is a Thri-kreen ecology book, so one chapter talks about the psychological nature of the creature, and then we have the physical nature of the creature. Then it goes into combat abilities. We've got a chapter on the Thri-kreen society and their culture, the different nations. We're given Thri-kreen player character options and kits. Kits are kind of like second edition version of subclasses. And to round out this book, there is an adventure towards the back. So Thri-kreens are creatures that look like giant praying mantises with forearms and mandibles. I believe they were originally introduced as part of Spelljammer because Spelljammer predates Dark Sun. And then when they made Dark Sun, they made Thri-kreen a playable character race. Once again, we have a very cute piece of artwork depicting the Thri-kreen hatching from its eggs. So I believe these creatures are called Gith. They resemble a perverted version of the Gith race, which eventually went on to become the Githyanki and the Githzerai. Thri-kreen as a race is very powerful compared to the standard races. Even the fact that it has an extra pair of arms means that it's able to do more things at once. So to be honest, I really enjoy this artwork, but I also acknowledge that this artwork is not really appropriate for Dark Sun. As the world of Athas is incredibly deadly, I don't think this art really belongs in this world, which is also why I enjoy it, because this type of art is something that we will never see from Dark Sun. So A Taste of Fear is the adventure that's included in this book. It is designed for 3 to 6 characters of levels between 6 and 9. And I also love the idea of having an ecology lore book having an adventure towards the end as well. So you're getting lore, flavor, and gameplay. And then towards the end, we have some NPCs and some new monster stat blocks. And this is the last product that we will go through today. It is the Dark Sun adventure called Arcane Shadows. So the adventure is suitable for 4 to 6 characters between 5th to 8th level, and it follows the stories set out in the adventures Freedom and Road to Uruk. So Arcane Shadows can be played as a sequel to those adventures, and then there's an adventure called Asticlian Gambit which can be played as a sequel to this module. So all of the Dark Sun adventures came in these slipcase box sets like this. Included in every single one of these adventures is a 16-page fantasy fiction short story which is designed to accompany the adventure. And they also tend to introduce some monsters or NPCs at the back of these pages. And these flip books were also something that they did for the Dark Sun adventure modules. The idea is that you have a flip book for the players and a flip book for the dungeon masters. So the players book depicts artwork and maps that's designed for the DM to show the players. So you have a lot of help in the form of visual aid to really set the scene and the flavor. And the accompanied Dungeon Master book has all of the information that you need to run the adventure. And there are points in the adventure where the Dungeon Master book will make direct references to the player's book. For example, in this part, when you get to this point in the story, blah 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 blah, have the players turn to player's book page 11, The Veiled Alliance Meets. So page 11 is Preserver's Meeting, which does not align with the wording in the Dungeon Master's book, The Veiled Alliance Meets. Because I know a little bit of the Dark Sun lore, arcane magic in the world of Athas is fueled by life force, and this is why wizards casting spells destroy the land. Preservers have trained themselves to only take enough life force to power the spell, essentially learning the eco-friendly version of the spell. And because I know that the Veiled Alliance are all preservers, This makes sense to me. But for somebody who does not understand that, they're going to look at this and go, oh, I must have gotten the page wrong. And there are no other page numbers on each of these apart from the wording up here. So I think the editor of this product deserves a limp slap on the wrist. Let's have a look at another one to see if this is an ongoing problem or maybe I'm the crazy one. This one says, tell the players to turn to Players Book page 17, Meeting Chambers. So this is 17 where it says Meeting Chambers and this is the map of the Meeting Chamber. So this is consistent. So that might just be a one-off oversight, but at least it confirms that I'm not the crazy one. I have not played any games in the Dark Sun setting. This is something that I do want to do. But the general consensus on this adventure seems to be that it's a bit of a railroad. This is a fairly common complaint for 2nd edition adventures because back then a lot of the settings published novels and the adventure modules written to accomplish the novel rather than the other way around. So you end up with a situation with the characters in the novels being the real heroes that go around solving everything, defeating the villains, saving the world kind of thing. And then you have the player characters in the modules doing a lot of stuff in the shadows, so to speak, kind of like the unsung heroes. However, they can never do anything to really change anything because all of the events of the novel must come to pass in order. So therefore the player's characters are not really given the agency to really make any actual decisions. So there's something else I want to show you. These little booklets can be propped up like that, like a little desktop calendar, so you can display the artwork that you're showing to your players. And the same thing for the DM's book as well, but I don't know why you want to do that with the DM's book. So I'm pretty sure I bought this in April, so it took about 3 months in order to reach me, but I'm happy that I got it in the end. And this is the last Dark Sun adventure that I was missing, so now I own all of the Dark Sun adventures and most of the books. I think I'm only missing 3 or 4 from the complete collection. And that is the last product for this month. Hey, thanks for staying to the end. If you got something out of that, Hulk smash that like button. We've got more unboxing videos coming up, so make sure you subscribe. If you're in the mood for more unboxing videos, I will link the playlist to your screen right now. So until next time, hope we get to hang out again in my next video.